Okay, everybody, it's 8 a.m. I will call the meeting in the Metropolitan Sewerage District for the Madison to order. Welcome to all of our guests who are present here today or joining us virtually. And Michael, do you have any announcements? Oh, virtual meeting guidance. Sorry, Janelle, you want to go through virtual meeting guidance?
Thank you, Commissioner Havel. Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public and staff. And in addition, we have 3 commissioners joining us virtually today. Those commissioners are Commissioner Clark, Eskridge, and Rummel. Good morning. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all to please follow. First of all, for the people who are in the room today, a little something new for you. You're going to notice on the table a little piece of green tape. Please place or get as close as possible to bring your microphone onto that so it's a little closer to you so we can hear you today when you're speaking, since the meeting is a hybrid. Number 2, please make sure your mic is muted unless you're speaking. Once again, for anybody at the table, you toggle that on and off with the green circle on the microphone. Number 3, please state your name before speaking. This is so our virtual attendants know who's speaking. Number 4, for those people who are attending virtually and wishing to chime in, please, if possible, have your cameras on so we can have you be part of the meeting a little bit more than a voice in the cloud. And finally, this meeting is being streamed on YouTube and the public chat has been disabled. So if you need to message the host, we are monitoring that and we will see your comments. So with that, let's have a great meeting, everyone, and welcome.
Thank you, Janelle. Michael?
I don't have any announcements, but I will note we have 7 commissioners, and we have a 2/3 majority for the vote that will be taking later on the budget amendment.
Okay, let's see. Any appearances by the public? And do we have anybody virtually that shows raised hands or not? Okay, we'll move on to the consent calendar where we have the meeting minutes of the 17th of August, review and approval of sanitary sewer extension plans, Hickory Lane, the Hartman redevelopment, and Kilkenny Farms. And then we have the authorization for addition of heat and power improvements to the 2023 capital projects budget. Review of bids, award a contract, and increase in total project cost for Pump Station 17, Force Main. And then approve transaction amount and approve professional services agreement for Pump Station 17, Force Main relief. Do we have any questions before we get a motion? No questions. Do we have a motion to approve?
Wilson, I'll move approval of the items on the consent calendar.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson to approve the consent agenda. Do we have a second?
I'll second this, Commissioner Meyer.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Meyer to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay. That will take us to topics where we have the presentation of the audit findings by our auditors. Take it over.
Very much, and good morning, everybody. Michael and I appreciate the opportunity to come to present the audit results for this year. I will save you a little bit of anticipation. We have a really good discussion today. Things are in really good shape, so we'll start there, and then we'll go into the details a little bit. But as we move through today, what I wanted to just quick walk you through is we have a little bit of an agenda for you. So we're going to do a quick introduction of myself, and I'll let Michael introduce himself as well. We're going to talk a little bit about what we're hired to do and how we do that, the results of the audit, some required governance communications. So there are some items that we like to make sure that we share with this group as it relates to what those results are. And then ultimately recognition to the team for all the help that they provide in working through the audit. It is a very complex process. We ask a lot of questions. We request a lot of supporting documentation and information from the team. And it's on top of the day job of keep keeping the district moving on its day-to-day operations and making sure the bills are getting paid, employees are getting paid, and that we're billing our communities for the services we're providing. So, and then we'll go to closing remarks. I do have some time at the end of the agenda for questions, but as we're going through, please don't hesitate to ask your questions as we go through. Interruptions are completely acceptable. So quick, before we dive into the scope of work, my name is Jordan Boehm. I'm a principal with Clifton Larson Allen, and I am a new face to the group for this year. We had Shannon Small is typically the individual who would be presenting the results. She is out on leave at the moment, so I stepped in to help get things over the finish line, and it's been a pleasure to work with the team. I've been working with state and local government communities, entities, and communities for a little over 11 years, and my role really is the final review of the financial statements and our audit file in bringing things to a close to get the results here today. So, Michael, I'll let you quick.
Morning, everybody. My name is Michael Barr. I've been with CLA here for 7 years, specifically with the state and local government crew here for about 3. I've been on the job here for the past couple of years now as well, and my role is being in the senior position here. We kind of call it the in-charge role. I'm a little more involved with the day-to-day process of the audit, working with your team and your staff to kind of get things going, get the documents we're requesting, and making sure all the testing is up to par for the standards.
All right, so as we dive in and we go into the scope of work, so really as your auditors, what are we asked to do? So we are asked to collect the information necessary to determine that the financial statements that you receive that are prepared each year are materially correct, reasonable assurance that they are materially correct in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So what we're looking for is, is the way that you're capturing the financial data and then reporting it consistent with the standards that are set as an industry within the accounting world? So are they comparable to other communities or entities similar to you, not only in the state of Wisconsin, but across the U.S.? So in doing so, in completing that work, to issue our opinion on the financial statements, really with the audit process, and this is a very simplified kind of description of what the audit process would be, is we work on behalf of governance, so this group, which is why you receive the final results and the communications from us. Ultimately, we report to you and work with management to complete the audit process. So we look at governance to provide the strategic decision-making and lay the pathway for management's execution in the operations and financial management of the district. So ultimately, as governance, you do have accountability and fiduciary responsibility for that accounting and finance function. And so management, what they're going to work to do from a financial standpoint is establish accounting policies and controls that will provide reasonable assurance that you will mitigate the risk of your financial information not being correct, because you're using that information to make decisions throughout the year and ultimately lay the path forward for what you're hoping to accomplish over not only the short term, but the long term. Also, management is responsible for those financial statements, so all the information that is compiled by management for our review and ultimately conclusion upon whether transactions are handled correctly, the control processes are being followed, and those financial statements are appropriately presented in accounting principles. As your independent auditor, we're going to take that information, we're going to subject it to testing. We do not test every transaction that you enter into. There wouldn't be a great cost benefit to that from an audit perspective, but what we do is perform a risk assessment of what we know about your entity, as well as what we know about other state and local government entities in the state of Wisconsin, and determine a set of procedures or testing that we will do over significant account balances and or transactions. And we don't, one of the staples is that we set materialities. So we look at quantitatively what would be significant to a user of the financial system. So if there was an error greater than a certain dollar amount, that could impact a user's judgment or decision-making based on the use of that financial system. But we also consider not just quantitative, but qualitative. So are there aspects of the financial reporting? Well, it may not be a large dollar amount, still would be significant. Somebody using that. And then what we will do is we will sample transactions. So, for example, when we think about cash processes, cash receipting, we have cash disbursements. So you think of cutting a check or an ACH to pay a vendor, and then payroll processes. There's kind of three ways cash flows in significant transaction silos. And what we'll do is we'll perform tests of transactions looking at the process from the initiation of what would cause you to be able to create an invoice for a vendor and or pay an employee, and we'll follow that all the way through the transaction process to when it gets paid and when it gets posted to your general. And we'll check the control processes along the way to make sure that the appropriate reviews are. And so that's one way that we work to get comfortable with transaction processes. And then we will also, for example, confirm balances with your bank accounts, so your cash and investments. We will test your receivable balances to make sure that you are getting paid for what you're billing and what you are owed. Look at accounts payable, and also in your world, capital assets. We're a very capital-intensive business, so we'll spend time there looking at the capitalization of projects and assets that you are undertaking and incurring, and making sure that those are presented correctly. And we'll look at things like debt as well. If you have debt, are you meeting the covenants required within the debt? We'll evaluate those. So it is a very intensive process, and again, thanks to your management team and your business and finance team for all the work that they put in, because they process overall. One thing that we are asked to always consider are significant risks. Really, the significant risks, when you look at these are from an audit perspective. These are things we have to consider in performing our role as your auditors. So things like management override of controls. The higher you get up into management, the less we'd like to see somebody, for example, preparing a transaction, reviewing a transaction, approving a transaction, and then posting a transaction to your general ledger. We'd like to see different checkpoints in there, maybe different individuals, so we consider that in our audit process. Revenue recognition, that is it's an industry standard that we consider that a risk in our planning, so we'll look at things like receivables to make sure that the work was performed and earned, and therefore you're taking credit for what somebody owes you and the revenue that you're getting to recognize for financial statement. Other things that we will consider are segregation of duties. So going back to management override of controls, we spend time looking at the control processes and making sure that they're being followed. Because the more controls that you have, the less risk that there would be of a error or misstatement occurring that would be significant. So the results. I'm happy to say that the opinion that's included in the financial statements, our independent auditor's report, will indicate that it is an unmodified, so really common language, it's a clean audit opinion, which means that we were able to complete our audit process and testing and determine that the financial statements that you have in front of you are materially correct. So it's not absolute assurance, it's not 100%, but it is reasonable assurance based on the audit process that has to be undertaken and the testing. So as we go into accounting policies, I do highlight that in Note 1 to the financial statements, and the financial statements were made available to you, I believe, electronically. If you're looking at what would be typically the balance sheet or income statement of the district, if you're ever wondering why a number is presented a certain way on those statements, Note 1 kind of gives you a little bit of background. Categories and how they're presented. So receivables, assets, there's a little bit of language related to what is your capitalization. We capitalize, what dollar amount do we use to determine what would be capitalized? For 2022, there were no new accounting policies implemented within your financial statements. There are always new accounting standards that come out each year that have to be evaluated by the management team for implementation. And this year, there were no new standards that were required to be implemented by the district that would have had a material impact on your financial statements. So if you look at your financial statements from 2022 and 2021, they're going to present very similarly. They're very much more of an apples-to-apples comparison versus if you had a significant change or a new policy implemented. I would highlight that and explain why these two documents may look a little different than There were no transactions that were entered into that lacked authoritative guidance. So when you see this, it's, did you have any transactions where there isn't a accounting standard that supports the presentation of that information in the financial statements? And I can say that there were not. The transactions that you're undertaking have good support from the accounting standards and how they're presented in the financial statements, so they are very consistent with any type of entity reporting under government. From a governance communication, and as we continue, there are certain estimates that are included in your financial statements. These are non-cash types of transactions that are utilized to represent services performed or rendered that, again, haven't had a cash impact for you as of yet, but are required to have certain assumptions taken in to bring your financial statements to a close. And these are very consistent with other districts within the state and other communities that are state and local government reporters, one being the participation in the WRS pension plan. Continues to be a very strong plan. You actually have a net pension asset. That asset is not the commissions to use. It's held in trust for your employees, for those future benefits that you have promised. For your purposes, the thing that I usually will highlight is anytime that you have a pension plan and it's in a strong position where you have sufficient assets put into the trust to pay those promised benefits in the future to cover the liabilities. When you're around that 100% mark or above, which WRS is, it's fully funded, it means you should have very stable contribution rates over time. So how this impacts your cash flow each year is you'll make a contribution on behalf of your employees with each pay period to contribute, whether it's somewhere between 6.5 and 6.75 is generally where it's been over the last few years. I would expect that to continue to remain stable. So you should not see a significant increase in the plan if it was not in a strong position and they needed to more revenue to be able to make those. Another item is always any other post-employment benefits, very similar. They're not as big of an impact in cash flows and those types of things. And then another one, and again, this goes back to your capital assets, is that when you capitalize an asset, so if you do a project and that project has a useful life of 40, 60, 80 years, it's going to have a long service capacity. From an accounting perspective, we account for that as an asset that will produce a useful life or generate revenue over a period of time. So the expense related to that asset gets allocated to each year based on how many years is it going to live and the total cost of the project. So if you had a $1 million project and it was going to last 10 years, over the next 10 years, you would incur $100,000 of expense. So that's when we talk about that estimate. It's ultimately determining how long do we think this asset. That is an estimate. This is a slide where I always say no with a bold and underline is a fantastic thing. In an audit presentation, no news is generally good news. We had no significant unusual transactions, no particularly sensitive disclosures that I would highlight from your financial statements. Again, they're very consistent, what we would expect for state and local government reporters. No difficulties performing the audit. Your management team puts a lot of effort into making this a smooth process and also making sure that that information is complete and accurate. No uncorrected or corrected material misstatements. This is a highlight to, again, the accounting function when we come in and we do our audit process. When we don't have any audit adjustments that we would propose, it generally provides you some comfort that the information you're receiving during the year is accurate and that the decisions you're making based on that information are sound. No disagreements with management. no consultations with other accountants, so no needing to go out and get a second opinion, for example, on the treatment of an accounting transaction or the presentation of financial information. And then lastly, management does sign a representation letter at the end of the audit. And really what that representation letter reflects is that the information that was provided and the questions that were answered during the audit were done so in as complete a form as possible, so that as we come to our conclusion and form our opinion, we're doing it on the best information available to support the information. So again, recognition, thank you to everybody on the team. I know the finance team incurs a lot of the burden, but it also goes outside of finance because there's always questions on projects and those types of things. So again, thank you to the team. It's always a tremendous help when it's a strong partnership in performing the process, and I like to make sure I acknowledge that as a part of the governance. So with that, I would open it up to any questions. That is our.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Virtually, any of the commissioners have any questions?
Nope, thank you.
There's something I thought that we talked about a while back, that we were going to have a question for the auditors, Bill, remember? That was...
If at any point there are questions, it isn't a once-a-year opportunity to speak with us for governance. If you do have any questions and you do want to have a discussion, please don't hesitate. Let Dana know and she can connect us with you. And even if it's just a kind of one-on-one conversation for questions, I'm always happy to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, that will take us to item 4B, to amend the 2023 operating budget. It requires a 2/3 vote. Bill?
Morning, Bill Walker, Senior Director for Budget and Planning. Here to ask you to do what is on the screen, amend the operating budget. Specifically, what we're asking you to do is increase this is a very technical and important phrase, the 2023 operating budget expenditure authority by $1,927,500. And your primary question is, why do we need to do this? And there's a 4-part answer. The first part is we are trying to correct the same problem we brought you for the 2022 budget, which is oversimplify a miscalculation in the amount of capital labor allocation, and I will explain what that is on the next slide. But the point here is that means the 2023 operating budget expenditure authority is smaller than it should have been and smaller than we need it to be. Related reason is we were reminded last time by council that you're really supposed to amend the operating budget before the year ends, and it's August, which is before the end of the year. And the third point is, based on our past experience and what we're seeing so far, if we correct this problem, this should be the only amendment we need to do. We can be done with it. I'm not making a promise here. I'm making a prediction, but I'm fairly confident in that. And then the final point is what we're asking you to do is equivalent to following the new recommended budgeting process that Baker Tilly offered us in their review of our processes last time. This is actually the same thing we're doing in 2024. So it's fixing a problem in a timely way, hopefully the last time we have to deal with it, and following a new process. All right, you're with me so far. Now I'm going to see if I can lose you by talking about capital labor allocation. We're talking about expenditure authority here, and the last time I introduced this phrase, I used the example of A parent and a teenage child going to a county fair. You remember this picture of the Ferris wheel? The kid wants to run around and buy things, and the parent says, great, here's a $100 bill, you may spend 50 of it. The kid has $100 worth of money, $50 worth of expenditure authority. Setting aside the odd family dynamics in that example, that's the same situation the district's in. We have plenty of money in our reserves, but we're only permitted to spend what's authorized in the budget. So we are not asking for money. We're asking for permission to spend. And that's confusing because how can you spend more without needing more money? And we don't need more money. And the reason is what's going on here is we're talking about two different budgets at the same time, not one. And those two budgets are the operating budget and the capital projects budget. When you construct the operating budget, one of the very first things you do is figure out what you're going to be obligated to spend on labor in the budget year. An easy number to come up with, more or less, because you know who works here, you know their wage rate, you know their progressions, you know what the general wage increase is going to be, you know what their benefits are, you can estimate overtime. So with a little caution factor, you can figure out this is how much we're obligated to spend on labor. And that's what the blue box is. And under the Baker-Tilly method, that's the end of the analysis. You're done. You build that in your operating budget, and you are confident you can pay your obligations. What we used to do, and what we have done through 2023, is take a chunk of that expenditure authority and throw it away. The operating budget is built with less authority than what we know we need. Why would you do this? Well, you can get away with this because, in general, some of your labor is going to be charged to one or more capital projects, right? I did not put that blue square in the capital projects budget. I tossed it off into space because there's already labor authority in each capital project budget. They're built with a sense of how much time is going to be needed. You're going to be in trouble, though, if that square is the wrong size, either because you charge less to capital projects than you thought you were, or because you miscalculated the size of it. The last time we brought this, everyone, my colleagues and you, were very interested in trying to figure out how to fix the sizing of the square. And Baker-Tilly's point is that is a waste of effort. What you should do is leave it where it was, and you never have any problem at all. And that's what we're doing in 2024. What the request is for today is put that square back, and that square in 2023 is $1,927,000. So that's what we're asking you to do. Amend the expenditure authority to increase by that amount. Glad to take questions, but bottom line is help us out.
Okay, does any commissioner have any question or comments? Greg?
Great. This is Commissioner Freeze. Okay, Bill, so thank you. And I just want to confirm my understanding what the plan is going. So Madison, the DOT, anybody who is regulated by the state laws or municipalities, which I assume district. Well, but I want to be clear, right? Because for us, we have an operating budget limit. Madison up to a certain amount. So we have to capitalize. We have to move that square that you had up on our capital budget, as does the DOT, as does a bunch of other municipalities, for legal reasons, because we have to cap our operating cost at a level, or there are and that is not right. If you roll back the clock 30 years, that is or any other municipality. Operating salaries were operating, capital cost was capital cost of building the structure. But that does not apply, that particular little lever does not apply to, I would call the old school today.
I think you're confusing two different things. We just heard a presentation on auditing, accounting, which is about tracking how money is spent and recording it in the correct spots. We will still record labor that is devoted to a capital project as coming from the capital budget. because that's where it came from. That is an accounting matter. This discussion is about making sure that we have enough permission to spend, authority, in the operating budget in case we need it. So we will be charging to the right spots as we always have, or as what, insurance, making sure that we don't run into a ceiling. It's not really about how the expenditures are actually tracked and accounted. Budgeting and accounting, budgeting. Well, also, we don't have a
Okay, it does help, thank you.
I was just gonna say that, you know, what the state regulations deal mainly with the levy and the increase in the levy, and we're not using property tax yet.
Commissioner Eskridge has her hand also up.
Okay, Commissioner Estrich, go ahead.
Thanks. So Bill, am I understanding correctly that we are effectively saying here that we're always going to underspend our budget authority because we're effectively budgeting twice for capital labor costs? So it would make sense that on some level, we should anticipate going forward that we will always be underspending our budget authority. Is that right?
yes, that would
As
be
long
the
as we're
result of
capitalizing some labor every year, which presumably we'll be doing going forward.
That is correct. That should be the result of this design. And if we're not doing it, means that we're misbudgeting somewhere else, and that's a thing to correct.
Yep.
I had one other point to make here. Until we transition to a modern ERP system and accrual accounting, having expenditure authority we don't use is essentially the only way to avoid going over our budgets, because we don't have, as we talked about in detail last time, we don't have the tools to sort of track with precision in real time our spending. We have to wait for the audit that you just heard about. So there's a caution factor here that also helps with that other issue.
Great, thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion? And we're going to want a roll call vote on this because we need 6 votes. We have 8 commissioners, virtual and in person. So do we have a motion to approve the 2023 operating budget amendment?
It's Wilson. I'll move the amendment as proposed by staff.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson.
Commissioner Freeze, I would second.
Motion, second by Commissioner Freeze. So we have a motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Freeze to approve the amendment to the 2023 operating budget. Anybody else have any comments or questions before we get the vote? Okay, wanted to give one last chance. So, would you look, please?
Absolutely. I will start with the people attending virtually. So Commissioner Eskridge.
Aye.
Commissioner Clark. Maybe he fell off. Okay. Commissioner Rummel.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Meyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson.
Aye.
Commissioner Havel.
Aye.
Commissioner Freeze.
Aye.
Commissioner Bookland.
Aye.
Okay, so Ken seems to have dropped off.
And just, we need 6 votes, but
Right.
it is of the members elect, so we need we need 2/3 of 9, which is
2/3 is 9, right? That's what I went over before. I didn't know if
Yeah.
it's the members present and voting or the members
members elect.
elect. So we do have the 6,
Yes.
we do have the 6 votes of the members elect of the 9 total. Okay. So that motion carries with the required or more number of votes. So we have 7 persons still participating in the meeting. We have 7 ayes. Study session on the equity action matrix. Michael?
Thank you, President Havel and Commission. This is the study session that's been anticipated since our last discussion about equity as a commission during strategic planning last year. And there was a lot of energy and around this topic, and we wanted to circle back and make sure we're going in the right direction on this. As I was thinking through the format for today, I really wanted to outline how did we get here, share some research on best practices around water equity, and then align it with what we're already doing, what is reflected in our 2024 focus items, in our core work, and then put that in a matrix and ask you, is this enough? Are there any gaps that we should be thinking about in terms of future work, or are there things that we should be defining differently or looking at a little bit more closer that in our current plans? Those are the new opportunities, and then have some discussion with you about that. You know, equity is coming to the forefront today, particularly for water utilities, because of the pervasive and material differences in wealth in our communities. And Madison is not excluded from that. The 2023 Race to Equity report indicated a lot of racial disadvantage in our community, even though we're perceived to be a very wealthy and community. And that sent shockwaves through the community. It's interesting to note that when that report came out in 2013, the district, we were in the first year of having an HR program. Before that, we didn't have any HR support. Department directors did all their own HR work. So you can see, even as a district, we have been going through a quite significant evolution in our HR policies and how we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. The other piece of why this is so important to water utilities is we have an affordability dichotomy going on. On the one hand, we need higher rates to afford taking care of our critical infrastructure, aging infrastructure. Utilities around the country are facing this problem and increased regulatory pressures. And at the same time, there are people in our service area that can't afford rates the way they are. So water utilities are looking at equity very closely and saying, how do we deal with this dichotomy externally? But internally, we have work to do too, to be a diverse and inclusive organization. You received a report on our work with our engagement survey, and that is one tool we are using internally to get our arms around employees' feelings about inclusion. And that data is critical for us because you can't solve problems you can't see. And the data from the survey, which is our first part, and then drilling down into what that information means, is going to be critical for us to do work on the internal front. Strategic plan really focuses equity. And what I like about our strategic plan, which is different than some of my colleagues who have strategic plans, is that the district has embedded equity in our strategic plan. And the fifth owner expectation, which this commission curated carefully, talks about the importance of equity in our work. And as soon as this plan was approved in August, staff went to work. So we were working on things, but this gave us the direction we needed to begin looking at ways to enhance our efforts in this area. And those are through our performance areas, which we have to do with excellence in order to support these owner expectations that we have. I looked at what some of the other forward-facing utilities are doing on the equity front, and how are they looking at it. And there are a lot of different approaches and ideas and implementation strategies going on, but they all have some common themes around things that all of them are thinking about or achieving in some manner. One, of course, is around affordability and looking at implement efficient operations and looking at the social safety net programs to minimize the financial burden on some that can't afford the rates. Employment is how do we create a pipeline for the workforce of the future as our experienced employees begin to retire, and we need to create jobs that are not only great jobs, but we have to diversify the workforce and do that. Workforce development is how do we internally work on our work and create an inclusive workforce. And then climate and resilience is about climate change impacts marginalized communities disproportionately. So our work around climate long-term will help us minimize those impacts. Then procurement is around, we have a lot of buying power here at the district. Matter of fact, over half of our budget goes into capital projects. And those drive jobs in our community and work, and the equipment and services we buy through our operating budget also promote the type of work we want and who does the work. Then finally is access and transparency, and this is around how do we engage all communities who may be potentially impacted on decisions as we move forward, and being very mindful and thoughtful about that. Current strategies we have here are what we're actually working on in these areas. We don't talk enough about it, but when we do adaptive strategies, such as Yahara winds, fluoride minimization, and your recent decision on Badger Mill Creek compliance, we save rate dollars. We would have had a rate increase equivalent of covering about $600 million of capital expenditures if we would have performed our normal work through infrastructure enhancements to achieve these compliance strategies. And so affordability and cost minimization is what we've been focusing on. Employment, the commission last year funded a trainee program. 3 employees, 2 trainees, and an apprentice worker. That program is proceeding. We're monitoring it. HR, Mike Lipsky and his team are engaging local groups for the talent pipeline, and I use the word talent broadly. Talent is not experience, but it's motivation. About motivation, and if we have motivated people, we can train them to do great work. That is what the pipeline is about. And then we invest in employees and their families with competitive wages. One of our 2024 focus items is doing a wage study. The E-team is currently working with the Employee Leadership Council on what that will look like, but that will be done next year. It's one of our focus items. And of course, you approve the employee handbook, which outline new benefits to support families. So when we do recruit for diversity, we have people coming into an organization with good paying jobs, living wage jobs here. Those are things we're currently doing. Around climate and resilience, we have our greenhouse gas reduction plan. The commission will be approving next year. It's one of our focus items. Use Envision for capital projects, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Envision in a minute here. Then we're already adapting our power systems for alternative power in our pumping stations, and we have a very robust inflow and infiltration program. Procurement, this is the area where we follow the law, and if there is an area where over time we could do more, it would be in this area, because we leverage so many public dollars through our projects. But that would require new resources and more research. I'm not prepared today to commit to anything new in the procurement area. But if this is felt was an area of need, we would come back with some ideas for funding that type of work. Just at the cusp, I think, as the size of our large cities and municipalities have staff that can do all this work and the auditing necessary. We don't have that staff. We would have to look at other. Then access, Envision, it helps us with access, and communications is our strategic communications program. We look at who's impacted and who should have a say in the work we do, and we engage them proactively and early in the process. Equity in budgeting. There was a really interesting article in the municipality, and some of you know the municipality. It's the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and there was a great concentration on equity in budgeting. And they mentioned that local governments that have the most success with equity in budgeting have found it is important to focus efforts. And longstanding GFOA best practices that your budgets should be linked to your strategic plan and your actions. And that is exactly what our budget does, and the 2024 budget you will be receiving does an even better job of linking your priorities in terms of the strategic plan and focus items into work that's going to get done. And since you have embedded equity in your strategic plan, we can be very transparent and open about the work we're doing because it's in our budget. And of course, with transparency, our budget is a very readable document. We take a lot of pride that any person should be able to read it and understand and see where the money is going. Another thing is Envision. We use projects. Envision is a rating system. Many of you may be familiar with LEED for buildings. Envision is somewhat similar to LEED, except it's for uninhabitable or not habitable linear infrastructure, such as what we have at the sewerage district. And we use Envision to help us plan and design and construct sustainable infrastructure. We use it as a guide with our projects, and it helps to make projects more sustainable and address the full range of sustainability when we do projects. There are 64 different indicators, and there's 25 Envision sustainability professionals on staff, and you have to go through training and testing to get the credential to be an ENVSP and earn that ENV in your name. Did want to go ahead.
Quick question on Envision. This is Commissioner Meyer. Michael, do I have this right that Envision is both, I'm going to think of it this way, sort of a substantive dimension of design and planning and design, I guess, of the infrastructure we're building, but also a procedural dimension of sort of who you engage, how you engage, that part you mentioned a minute ago? Does Envision encompass both of those pieces? Do I have that right?
It does, and this slide kind of reflects on that. I wanted to outline the indicators that touch on equity, such as well-being, mobility, equity and social justice. Second one, which you touched on, Meyer, which is collaboration and stakeholder engagement and being very mindful about that. Procurement is part of this, and then how you cite and conserve in natural world, and of course, climate. And we've only verified one project, and that was Pumping Station 15, and that is because as we evaluated that project, it impacted municipalities, a park, a housing area, and went and did a deep dive. But we do use it as a guide for all of our big projects and ask some of the questions as much as. Here's Pumping Station 15, just to show you an example of what a traditional pumping station looks like. And this is the city of Madison. We put bathrooms in to help with the community that didn't have bathrooms in this park, as well as taking care of work of a pumping station and having our. Here are the focus items that are supported by equity in the plan. There are 5 areas where equity will be reporting to you next year on equity. I also wanted to outline a few things that you're going to be seeing and I will be reporting on. Since equity is a focus item, I will be reporting progress to you quarterly. I'm going to be resuming an owner community of practice group on equity. This is something I gathered a few communities together to begin having conversations around best practices around the social safety net aspect of equity. And this was right when MadRep was emerging from the Madison Water Utility, which was approved by the Public Service Commission. Now that we have that template that Madison has established, I want to reconvene this group to begin having conversations around equity and sharing best practices. I also define equitable engagement. One thing that may be beneficial, and I've seen some utilities do this, is they establish environmental justice policies, and they're fairly brief, a couple paragraphs, but it outlines values around engagement, what's important, how we engage. It's not how, but what values are. So I want to circle back with the commission on equitable engagement, maybe later this year, maybe early next year, get your thoughts on that, and I have some ideas there. There's also a memorandum of agreement with the Ho-Chunk Nation and the Dane County Parks and Dane County Historic Society that I've been working on. I have a draft of that done, and I'm trying to get the partners together so we can bring it to the commission for some discussion. And really the memorandum of agreement is really how do we work together to conserve cultural resources in the area around our treatment plant, and have a statement of any funds. But I'll be bringing that to you. And yes.
And does that agreement involve Foundation for Dane County Parks too? Because would have an.
They weren't as part of this project.
Okay.
The Friends of the Capital Springs Recreation Area were.
Right.
But the foundation wasn't part of this process.
Okay. It might be something to consider adding them. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about Bill Lunny Lake Farm Park being right here, and
well, you probably know that Bill Lunny was chair of Friends of the Capital Springs.
Yes.
So there's a close tie right
yes.
there.
And not sure, but the foundation does do all this work with the Friends, and they've been working a lot with Ho-Chunk Nation. It might be worthwhile, Michael, if it's possible. Aaron Mullins is their executive director. It might be worthwhile trying to tie them in. At least that's as an aside. We could have talked about that offline too, I guess.
Idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's where we're at on the matrix. And now I'm going to go back here for discussion and give Commission's reaction to this plan. And if you have any questions or other things we should be looking at.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Sure. I like the idea of doing this matrix, and I like how you came to it. It does provide for some written strategies, and it sounds like what you're going to do now is every quarter sort of add specifics to these strategies, the action items, so to speak, future opportunities. And I expect that future opportunities to continue to expand, or things that have been done to be reported in that quarter, which, are just they're going to expand on themselves, right? As we do one thing, it should lead to another, and that's good. Especially like the idea of engaging our owner communities again, because not only will it help us knowing what they're doing? But it also might help them when they're all together. And there's administrator groups and all kinds of different groups that meet monthly or quarterly that you probably have maybe gone to some of those meetings. And it may be helpful just to even engage at that point at those things, or at cocktail parties where you might hear more. But thank you, Michael, for putting this together. This is very, very good and very helpful. I like where we are and where you're planning on going. Very much on track.
President Hubble, both Commissioner Rummel and Eskridge have.
Commissioner Eskridge first and then Commissioner Rummel.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have a couple questions and then I also have some feedback or comments. So I'll just start with questions. Michael, I wondered if you can, thank you for the work on this first and foremost. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about the owner community of practice. Specifically, you said you used the term social safety net and this group, and I just am looking for a little bit more understanding of what you're meaning when you talk about that part in particular.
We had a study session a couple years ago on what could we do in terms of affordability related programs. And since we're a wholesale provider, we do not have a direct relationship with households. However, all of our owner communities do, and they can develop affordability programs and bill reduction and forgiveness programs. And so the thought here is we have a major interest in addressing this issue of affordability programs, even though we can't do it. Because as you'll see when I present our 2024 budget, our capital plan is increasing, and our rates are going to continue to increase to address that. There are some really interesting things going on in some of our owner communities. But I feel like if they could share their ideas with each other, maybe there are things that we could all learn to help our owner communities as we're increasing our service charges. So the focus is there, and I think the interest is there. That's where I would be focusing efforts.
Okay, that's helpful. I assumed you were talking about the affordability conversations, but I didn't understand that from the way you described it. So maybe just a little bit more explicit language around that might be helpful for others in case they weren't connecting the dots either. For now, why don't I hold my feedback for others who have questions, and then I'm happy to jump back in the queue.
Okay, Commissioner Rummel.
Thank you. I appreciated Commissioner Eskridge's question because that was sort of one that I was trying to understand. So thank you for that one. And I also agree that it's really interesting. I never heard of Envision, so I've Googled it and I want to learn more. What strikes me, I guess, lately, when I think about in the very 30,000 foot level of the MMSD has a project, and it's how many tens of thousands of feet of putting in new pipe, I start to think about trees. And so I don't really ever see trees called out really directly. And so I guess I want to make sure, and I'm sure it is part of your thinking, but that we develop a more of a tree policy. And I guess I mentioned this once before, but I'm now thinking it's my contribution to at least get the conversation started. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have any comments or questions or observations? Yeah, Commissioner Bookland.
Yep, this is Commissioner Bookland, and I just want to say I'm happy to see this program. I think it's well thought out. Sarah, thank you for your question, because that was the same question I had. And, I do see that it's up to owner communities, and I'd like to see that we're going to work closely with the owner community and making sure that the considered in rate increases, work through the issues. Thank you for all your hard work.
Okay, Ezra.
Commissioner Meyer here. Michael, I really like this, both on the substance of what's in it and also thinking about it as how we're gonna continually sort of implement what's in the strategic plan and actually turn those high strategic ideas into operational, reality every year. And so I hope we'll sort of iterate and see this again, at least annually, and the specific strategies will change, right? And so for me, how my brain sometimes works, I love everything that's in here, and I also hope we'll come back to procurement next year, and we'll come back to other things that maybe are called out here or aren't called out here, but that are, Tom kind of alluded to this, the way that things sequence out. You do this and it builds and sets up the next thing you'll do after that. But I think I raise all that partly thinking about what do you start on a little bit this year so that we're teed up for a more substantive conversation about maybe procurement next year, and does somebody have that on their work plan for the next 12 months so that those pieces are always progressing and sort of sequencing through their natural evolution. Had that thought about it, but really all feels good. I think as a bunch of good specifics, some focus items and some things that aren't quite focus items, but that are definitely ongoing that we'll be doing to implement what's in the plan. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ezra. Greg?
Commissioner Freeze, just one comment I wanted to make, positive comment. I think the trainee internship program, I'm speaking from experience here, engineering ops has a similar program. We do several programs like that now. And they have been extremely successful in terms of not only for the people, a number of those people. That has worked much more effective in terms of getting staff and communities to the community. Standard posting of an ad. Personally do agree. Having somebody who wants to do this, a lot of the work we do both is not, can be trained, right? If you want to do it, it can be trained. That is a big on that for both parties, both for the.
That gets to that motivated part. Tom, Commissioner Wilson, then Commissioner Bookland.
Just one thing that I guess I'd like to see, I missed it, is that you should somehow make sure that either in this matrix or in your reporting that we're seeing results. What's actually been accomplished, or how have we failed? Let's try to see that somehow. However you think that needs to be measured, but we need to see that reported. I think that's all I had, Tom.
Beth?
This is Commissioner Bookland. One thing, and you might already have this in place, but I'd like to know a little bit about the diversity and inclusion training that you have for all employees, starting with management and then going across the board. That's something that I'd like to see culture with already be in place.
Okay, Sarah or Marcia, do you have any additional observations or comments, questions?
I do, Tom. A couple pieces of feedback. I wondered, in terms of everyone's been talking about how we make sure that this is reflected and carried forward. I'm maybe being a stickler about terminology and alignment across our various tools, but when I looked at the themes that were here, it seemed to me that we could instead potentially categorize the various strategies by performance area, and then it would be consistent with the terminology in the strategic plan, and it would just take us kind of down a level from the big equity focus, or I think we call it a focus item in the strategic the owner expectation, right? So then within the owner expectation in each of the performance areas, we would be calling out the various strategies that are specifically related to equity, and that would then make them almost more like focus items, each of these themes, as you called them here, Michael. And then I wondered if we could also put this equity matrix into our budget each year so that it's kind of the next layer down from the strategic plan and calls out the efforts that we're doing there so that we have a mechanism to make sure that we're reflecting it publicly and also keeping ourselves accountable to this work. So just a suggestion there if it fits. The other piece that if we're going to put it into some sort of public facing document like the budget, which I'm suggesting, I wonder if we can come up with a definition that a working definition for equity so that we're not just using a big word that can mean a lot of things to different people. I think we start to get at that in the way that we use the word equitable in the owner expectation, but I think it would be helpful to call out that we mean equity in terms of all the various forms, racial, sexual orientation, gender, income, just list that out when we put it into a public facing document and make sure that we're aligned on that definition. That would be helpful to me. And then when you ask about, feedback on are we doing enough, Michael, I think this is a really good start, but I think some of our current strategies are best practices in general, which is fabulous, but not maybe giving if equity is truly one of our focus items, we should be doing more in some of these areas. So Ezra alluded to this, but I think we should make a plan to include more work on procurement in the future, build up our capacity in that way. It doesn't have to be a whole robust new department, but are there minor changes that we can make in our procurement processes that ask for information in our bids about their workforce statistics or whatever, right? There are little things that encourage tracking and attention from our various vendors that might be nice ways to start incorporating this into our various processes as we're doing in so many other areas. And it seems like that might be a good thing to focus on. Also, Beth alluded to this in wanting to learn more about what the training is like. I think it would be helpful to maybe understand, and I know it's a focus area of the DEI strategy. If we're saying that we're having, maybe this is again just a terminology confusion in my brain, but we're having a separate workforce related DEI strategy. That makes sense to me, but then we're saying we're not having a separate DEI strategy as the equity focus item. Like, let's just be clear in our terminology about the DEI strategy being a workforce DEI strategy when we talk about it, so that it is contextualized in kind of its reach. And I'm just, clearly I have a lot of comments because I'm really keyed up about this work. So thanks for it. And thanks for continuing to keep us apprised of it and finding ways that we can keep ourselves tracking progress and results, as others have mentioned. Hopefully those comments and feedback make some sense. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I think we're completed with that item. You have enough information?
Yep. This
Michael?
has been very helpful feedback. It's what we have these study sessions for, and I can take that back and deliver on some of these ideas. So thank you very much.
Okay, so that will take us to 4D, an update on the Yahara Winds annual report. Marty.
Thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. Marty Griffin speaking. I'm going to give a short update on our Yahara Winds program for phosphorus compliance and show you how well we did with the data we have, which was from 2022. So just to give a little background and basis for why we have the Yahara Winds Adaptive Management Program is that, You know, phosphorus is all around us. We need it. It's essential, but too much is bad. And so one of the ways to get a handle on too much phosphorus through our regulatory agencies is to come up with basin TMDL. It's an accounting method for how much phosphorus is being pumped into the waterway systems. And so there actually is a TMDL in the Rock River Basin. TMDL stands for total maximum daily load, so that would be the total maximum daily load of phosphorus or other contaminants. Our specific TMDL looks at phosphorus in total suspended solids. You can see in the picture, the Rock River Basin TMDL covers that large green area, of which the Yahara River watershed, that orange area, that's where we are. And so we are named on the TMDL in the Yahara River watershed as a phosphorus contributor, so we have to do something about it. These reductions are necessary because of what I just mentioned. We have this TMDL drive in the regulations, so we do have a permit requirement and a water quality standard for phosphorus. For some reason, those numbers didn't show up on the graph, but you can relatively see that the large green bar is how much phosphorus is coming into the plant. That middle small green bar is how much is actually leaving the plant. So we do a really good job already of reducing phosphorus, but that tiny red sliver on the far right, that's how much the TMDL says we're only allowed to put out. So to get from that middle green bar to that far right red sliver is another 70% reduction. If I'll quote you the numbers, that little sliver of red is 0.075 milligrams per liter, so that's what we're allowed to put out in the environment to make sure we don't have those problems that phosphorus causes. So when you look at that little orange area in that previous map, you know, if we went down to 0, would that get us to where we need to be? Well, the TMDL says that there's a lot of other sources of phosphorus. So this slide is just illustrating that, you know, we could do our part, but there's still a lot of other sources that need to contribute to reductions to actually meet some of our water quality goals. So we're just a small part of the puzzle. Another thing I like to illustrate is that when those 3 buckets you see here, we're the small part of the puzzle, we also geographically only impact a small part of the puzzle. So if we went down to 0, for instance, we would only impact from the end of our pipe downstream. But you know that orange area I showed earlier, that whole Yahara watershed, the goal is to improve water quality in that whole area because that's what the TMDL is for. And so since we're using public dollars, we think it's more of a wise idea to work within the full watershed so we have more of an impact overall on the water quality and we can meet our regulatory standards. One of the unique things that allows us to do a watershed approach in the Yahara watershed is because of the land use. You can see there's a lot of yellow, and that corresponds to one of those buckets I showed on those earlier slides. So we actually have areas of land use that correspond to those buckets, and so if we hit at all the buckets instead of just one, we can have a really good successful opportunity to improve water quality. So the watershed itself is unique enough to give us this opportunity. That's why we chose adaptive management. That's what we call our Yahara Wins program. And I really don't know why none of my slides are showing up, but that's okay because I know what they say. So adaptive management really is important because of all the things I just stated, but one of the key things about it is that it's all those buckets and all those sources actually working together to improve water quality. And that's one of the uniquenesses of the program of Yahara Wins. It's not just focusing on ourselves and what we can do, but actually incorporating all of our partners and sources. And so I'm glad that the key word did show up in this slide, which is partnerships. And so the water quality criteria in the middle of this slide is meant to show that there's a lot of pieces that go into improving water quality, not just partnerships, but that is the key one. And that's what I want to highlight for the successes that we see. The one thing I want to mention is that we can have the best Yahara Wins program in the world, and we can get us to the best for the Yahara River watershed, but there are some challenges and some things that we need to understand. So when we come to phosphorus reduction. So some of these next slides are talking about some of the climate challenges that we have when it comes to phosphorus. As I talked about, the problem with phosphorus is when it gets into water and decreases water quality. This slide is showing a bunch of blue dots all over the place, and that's how much phosphorus is going into the system in that little orange area that I showed before. And so this slide just really meant to illustrate that there's a lot more variables that go in than just us working in the watershed and decreasing what we can. There's climate change involved. So if you look to the very, very far right of the screen, that's the most recent area, 2020, 2021, 2022. We're close to the green line, which is this established scientific line of this is how much phosphorus the system can actually hold. Goes back to that TMDL number I talked about, right? Like what is necessary for us to make sure we have good improved water quality. The little red dashed line you see above it, that's sort of like the long-term average of all the blue dots. So there is a gap between what's actually happening out there and what we need to reduce to actually see improved water quality. The gap isn't very large considering the scatter of the blue lines, and you can even see that the little blue dots, most recent history, are at that green line. But overall, we still need to reduce the amount of phosphorus, and that's what Yahara Winds and the Adaptive Management Program is trying to get at. This slide is illustrating the precipitation, and so one of the reasons why you see a lot of the scatter and a lot of those blue dots of how much phosphorus is going in the system is because of how much water is pushing that phosphorus off of the land into the system. So this slide is really just meant to illustrate over a long term the annual average precipitation. As you can see those orange dots to the far right, they're a lot higher than in the previous history. So we're having a lot more precipitation in the last 20 years, which is moving that phosphorus into the areas we don't want, right? And that's why we see that scatter on that previous line. The other thing, the trifecta here, is when you have a lot more precipitation, a lot more water moving that phosphorus to where we don't want it to go, you also see trends in stream flow. So these are all the tributary streams in the Yahara River, that little orange watershed I showed earlier. These are all the streams going to the Yahara River, and you can see that their flows are going up over time. So the flows are going up. That means that there's more precipitation moving that phosphorus, that essential nutrient, on the land into the waterways where we don't want it. So these are the sort of challenges we're dealing with when you work in the watershed. You can't control nature, but it's good to understand what they are so you can make sure that the interventions you put in can account for some of these things. The last challenge is timing. All that water that's coming, all the water that's moving, it doesn't all happen at the same time. So it really is important to understand when it happens as much as how it happens. The the one pie graph on the left, that's a 10-year average of timing. So the colors correspond to months of the year. The blue is spring, the red is sort of spring, early summer, green is summer, fall, and purple is fall, winter. The two pie graphs to the far right are just the last two most recent years. 2021 and 2022. So one interesting thing I like to show here is that clearly on the long-term average, we get a lot of that water movement in the spring, right? So practices that we go out and want to put out in the watershed, we want to make sure we look at what's happening on the land in the spring particularly. But from year to year, it can change. You can see that the last couple years, a lot of our waters come in the fall and in the winter. Some of that winter, warm-ups and things like that. So we actually have to know that as well. So these are just informations of some of the challenges that we need to account for when we're out working in the watershed. Things that I already talked about. So how well are we doing? This graph here is showing how well we've been doing as the Yahara Winds program of keeping that phosphorus on the landscape despite of all those factors I talked about and keeping that phosphorus where it should be and not in our waterways. The blue lines are our annual goals, and you can see that for the 20-year project for Yahara Winds, we have a ramp-up period where our annual goals increase every year until we get to the end of the project, where if we meet those goals, hopefully will correspond to an increase in water quality, that 0.075 I showed on that earlier graph. You can see over the life of the project, we're in year 6, 7, and you can see that we've exceeded our goals. The one thing I do want to point out on this particular graph is that purple line. And you can see the previous green, right before the purple line, looks like we were almost at our 20-year goal. We saw that when we looked at our data. We said, wait a second, doesn't quite make a lot of sense. Yeah, we know we're doing great work. We have a lot of good partnerships. The numbers are great, but that just seems to be not what we thought would happen. And so what we did is we went back and investigated the numbers, and what we found is that our adaptive management plan required a certain model to be used to access these numbers. But within the model, you had a couple choices of how to run it. And our partners that we're using to go out in the landscape to get these reductions weren't quite using the model exactly consistently the same way. The model is valid, each way is valid, but our partners were doing it differently. So when we would aggregate the numbers, we weren't really comparing apples to apples, and so our numbers were a little skewed. So once we found that out, we made some corrections. We are now requiring all of our partners to do the calculations all consistently in the same way, and we had to make a correction. But that's okay, because as you can see, we made the correction, but we're still exceeding our goals. So this is just, another way of the word adaptive comes into adaptive management, where you reevaluate, look at your information, and make sure you're on the right track. So that's a great, great sign. Now can't advance. I know. Thank you. So all the previous work I just showed is looking at this sort of metric of pounds of phosphorus that we hold back on the landscape. And so we look at our goals in that previous graph of the pounds of phosphorus. But we also have that 0.075, which is not a pound number, but it's a water quality number. And we got to make sure we're actually meeting the amount of phosphorus in the actual streams to make sure we meet our goals. So we have water quality monitoring, and this is just a graph or a map of our sampling locations that we partner with USGS to actually measure the water quality to see if we're also meeting our goals for adaptive management and our permit requirement of the 0.075. So if you look at the long-term average of what the actual concentration of phosphorus, how close are we to the 0.075? That black line on this graph demarks for the 0.075 is. And you can see that we're getting closer, but not quite there. The lines are all trending down, and you can see in 2022, they kind of pop back up. And I can tell you right now, the reason for that is that previous graph I showed. Typically, we would see higher stream flow, higher precipitation, shuttling that water through there. We didn't see that in 2022. We're in drought, which means that we had no water, which means the concentration of the actual pollutant in the water is going to go up. And this is a graph showing concentration. So it's another function of climate change we have to also account for. But again, we're looking at a long-term reduction success. It's a 20-year project. And so just the fact that we're trending down is a good sign. The yellow box is when adaptive management started. So clearly in the adaptive management phase versus before then, the graph is closer together and they're trending down, and that's what you want to see. The one thing I do want to point out is if you just look at the colors, if you look at the red, you can see that one dropped significantly in that box period. And that's really due to some of our partnerships. One of our partners, Dane County, is doing a project, Suck the Muck, and they learned that there's a lot of phosphorus that just sits in the streams releasing phosphorus that's from long, long ago, legacy phosphorus. So if you take that out, you'll see immediate drop in improvement in water quality. And they conducted dredging projects in that particular location, and you can see the results. So just another way we can show that some of these interventions that we're doing to reduce phosphorus actually works. And this is coming up. This is just to highlight some of the projects and partnerships that we're actually doing to see those successes that I just outlined before. And so this particular municipal project is actually looking to highlight us as a municipality. So you can see the MetroGrow symbol there, so that's our work. We're actually farmers as well. We put phosphorus out in farm fields as well. And so we want to make sure the projects we do at the district also work hand in hand with our adaptive management and our phosphorus reduction successes. And so what we've been doing is utilizing lower disturbance implements to keep the soil sort of less disturbed. So when we do get those high rainfalls and things of that nature, you don't see the phosphorus being moved as much. We already underground inject our nutrients, but we thought having a low disturbance injector would be a great thing. And the cool thing about it is we're actually able to calculate the pound of reduction when you go to a farmer and say, use our equipment versus your equipment, and see how much pounds of phosphorus we save. The number you'd see up there would probably be around 1/4 of a pound of phosphorus per acre, maybe higher. So that's something we're still working on, but something we can utilize now in our MetroGrow program as a way to improve water quality. Some of the other projects have to do with agriculture. This is a partnership with one of our major farming partners, Yahara Pride Farms, works more in the northern part of that orange watershed area showed, and also UW. And this is sort of promoting what you see on the left, a picture of, which is composting. So composting is taking that dairy manure or other nutrients, and instead of immediately spreading on the landscape, putting it through a composting process to come up with a drier material that can be stored and applied when it's the good time to do it. So remember those graphs I showed with the timing. If you're not beholden to having liquid storage that could fill up and you have to put it out there, if there's a way you can store it and put it out there when your crops need it and when the runoff potential is lower, that's always a good thing. But when anytime you want to tell a farmer to change how they put nutrients in the landscape, you got to make sure you show them how it's going to affect yield and growth. And so that's what this partnership project was, to show that, look, these alternate ways of putting nutrients on the landscape actually still will provide you yield, and you'll be just as successful farm as you were if you were using your other methods. The next few pictures are just some other examples of agricultural practices that our partners help implement, specifically Dane County, which is a big partner of ours, and also Yahara Pride Farm. You can see here on this picture, the right-hand side of the stream, those trees, right beyond there is a tributary stream. You can see the farmer here in this particular case instituted a buffer and a double buffer where they're not actually farming that close. So when you get those large rain events and that soil starts to move, it gets trapped and it won't automatically go into the waterway. Another example of making the water go where you want it to go. This is sort of a grass waterway with native plantings that you can see that the farmer farms where that green area is, doesn't farm here, and so when the rain comes, it moves the water to a better place and not going into the stream, so that phosphorus stays up on the landscape where it needs to be. This particular picture I really like to show is because it shows that when farmers take their crops off the field, they don't have to take it all off. The more you cover the field, the more soil that's covered in vegetation means that less movement of soil will occur when you see those rain events. And you can see here in this picture, they're actually planting cover crops in between the harvested corn. So it's a way to always keep the soil covered, and you never have an area of the year where it's bare. And it's really important when you think about those pie graphs, right? The timing of occurrence of these things typically happen when the ground was bare, right? We had that spring area before crops are growing, and then that fall, winter after crops are off. Just another example of planting cover crops. This is what they look like when they're coming up. And this is a picture of the low disturbance injector. So this is not ours. This is specifically for manure, but this is another way. You can see that behind the picture of the implement, you don't really see much disturbance. It still looks green, and that's a good thing. Less disturbance means less soil, less movement, and we'll meet our water quality goals. I think that's my last picture. So any questions, and thanks for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, Marty. I got a couple questions on you had that bucket graph. So it was 20% for sewer districts and then 30 for urban stormwater, and I think 50% was ag. Is that the contribution of phosphorus?
That's 100% correct.
Yeah, so that's who contributes the phosphorus to the environment, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then another question I have, you know, when we're doing Yahara winds, we're probably not just also affecting phosphorus from some of these, but we're probably affecting nitrogen and other things, I think?
Yes, 100%. I mean, yeah, we don't, you know, our focus for our permit and permit requirement is phosphorus.
Right.
And also TSS because of TMDL, but there's also many benefits of all the practices that are going out there. Nitrogen is one of them. Carbon is another one. And so, you know, we do talk about these interrelationships, but for the most part, Yahara Winds is focused on phosphorus reduction. So, for example, if we got a project proposal that said, you know, we can decrease all this nitrogen, not so much phosphorus, we'd probably pick a project that would decrease more phosphorus. But that doesn't mean that those projects don't also have benefits.
Right. Well, I guess my point is, I have a couple points with the question. First of all, I think it gets back to that, what you were talking about, Michael, with the whole equity thing, that in fact, Yahara Winds is doing more than just phosphorus. Well, that's its goal is phosphorus, but we should bear in mind too that we're doing more than just phosphorus, that there's a number of other things, and I've never thought of the carbon sequestration question. But my other point on it is that at some point I keep thinking that we're going to get hit with nitrogen requirements. And I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but the question revolves around then, if we're doing this, and I know it's only kind of a small part of the watershed, but are they going to be taking, will we be accounted for that nitrogen reduction that we're getting from our Yahara Winds, or are they going to take, you know, change the bar based on where the nitrogen is? because of your heroin. Get what I'm saying? Are they gonna lower the bar because because your heroin is taking some out, so they're gonna lower the bar even more? Or would they, I'm just trying to,
I think that's an impossible question to answer.
yeah.
I can tell you that adaptive management on the books, you know, it's for phosphorus reduction, and that's what it's for. It's for meeting the state water quality phosphorus standard, which has been established. So until they come out with a nitrogen standard and we see where we fall and what our actual compliance strategy will be, you know, it's hard for me to say if we can come with a proposal to say, look at our great work with Yahara winds, can we utilize that as our compliance? But great idea. Keep it in the back pocket.
Well, I just want to, right, have it in your mind, so when, if nitrogen ever starts coming up as a requirement, you know, we can point to what we've already, you know, and maybe, I don't know if there's a way that we can start measuring that too, to try to get a better idea of what, you know, what we're doing. May not be worth the effort, but. Anybody else?
Commissioner Hubble, Commissioner Eskridge has her hand up.
We'll go to Commissioner Wilson, then to Commissioner Eskridge.
Just a comment, Marty, that wasn't specific in there, is that one of the other side effects here is, like with Yahara Pride Farm, I mean, there is the farmers trying to help themselves as well. I mean, despite the fact that there's going to be runoff, these practices, maintaining their soil and maintaining the phosphorus where they want it. And I don't think the farmers aren't applying things to make it go into the lake. They want to keep it on the land. These practices are certainly helping that. And we need to keep stating that so that we can gain more of the producers help us with the whole effort. And Marty's done a great job of that. And it's understated how great a job he's done with that.
Commissioner Eskridge?
Thanks. Marty, thanks for this great presentation. I heard a lot about the macro challenges that are not unique to Yahara winds, but the just challenges inherent in climate change. Is there anything that you would highlight for us that are specific challenges that we should be aware of as a commission to Yahara winds, like very micro challenges that you're facing or that you anticipate in the near future?
Thank you for that question, Commissioner. You teed it up beautifully. So I didn't have a slide in here like, you know, what's happening in the future, what's the stuff we're looking for. One of the things we're looking at is the cost model. So when the Adaptive Management Project was first put together almost over 7 to 10 years ago, we looked at, you know, how much reductions do we need, how much reductions do we anticipate each practice to give us, how much of those practices actually cost, so how do we know how much money we'll need to actually get to the final goal. A lot has changed in those last 10 years about how much practices cost and the efforts involved. So we're looking at that cost model to see if there needs to be an adjustment in the amount of money we need to actually make this. So we're just starting that process. We don't have any data or numbers, but that is definitely something I would say would fall in that category of local micro scale specific to the project that the commission will be hearing more about, especially if the Yahara Winds Executive Committee has to make hard decisions about where we're going to get that revenue if we actually need more. Our current governance system is through intergovernmental agreement with all these sources of phosphorus that you're seeing, specifically the municipalities, the MS4s that are named in TMDL, and our intergovernmental agreement, you know, has a formulaic cap on the amount of dollars that can be put in. And so if we need to adjust that formula or adjust that intergovernmental agreement to better reflect the resource needs, that's something that'll go through the Yahara Winds governance, but also potentially here at the. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. Super helpful.
Beth?
I was interested in the composting that you had presented, because that's the first about what, you know,
Oh, great. Thanks for that question, Commissioner Brooklyn. So composting, I think, would fall under that, broad suite of conservation practices that can happen in the landscape. So right now, we're really partnering with Yahara Pride Farms to encourage composting. We help provide resources that they have a cost share program to help farmers up in their area of the watershed. And so composting is actually on the list of eligible cost share activities. So that's one way we're encouraging. That research I showed, that the slide didn't come up, but some of the numbers, that's another way that we're helping to sort of provide information out to farmers and say, hey, look, these conservation practices are going to help your soil health. They are going to help your yields. And so you should think about these when you're looking at these suite of practices that you want to get cost share for and see if it works for you. You also notice composting involves equipment and space. And so Yahara Pride Farms is also helping with getting equipment. And Dane County also now has programs that they can help fund equipment for farmers, and that composting equipment is in that suite of eligible types of things. So that's how we're doing to promote that practice.
Also, what about urban compost? Are winds involved in any of that?
That's a great question. So we haven't been involved in leaf composting, but more of like leaf collection and making sure the leaves don't have a direct conduit to the waterways. So a lot of our municipalities that are around the lakes, their stormwater infrastructure goes right to the lakes, right to the streams. And so there's a lot of these leaf pickup or keep your leaves out of the street. But I like your idea of leaf composting, so we can bring that up as a potential option. As like Commissioner Wilson said, phosphorus is okay if it's up, can't run off. So
we've actually given grants to a couple communities to start programs, right? That
you mean for leaf pickup?
Yes. One would hope that they're being composted somewhere.
I mean, not to get in the weeds on this, but because it is interesting. So and I have some information I can share. So the Dane County landfill actually had a leaf composting. Could bring their leaves there, and then they make the composting up. I don't think that program is as robust or is continuing as much, but the idea is out there, and then it actually can work. So putting that out there is information of how some worked.
Well, this is a little bit off topic, but I'd love to see a homeowner kind of leaf composting encouragement in the urban areas. Urban gardens and things like that. Compost your own leaves would be.
Can you go to that graph that you had of the watershed? Okay, so, the orange is the Yahara River watershed. But what % of the Yahara River watershed is our adaptive management area? So let's say that your Yahara River watershed is 100%. So what % is our adaptive management?
It's actually the whole watershed.
It is?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're working in the full watershed. That's one of the great perks of our large adaptive management program is we don't just have like a target area, as you may see some adaptive management programs have. We're operating in the full watershed. So.
Okay, because most of your charts for the water were based kind of north of Madison, when you had those streams and everything.
You did have the Yahara at Fulton as one of them.
Oh, okay.
I
didn't notice.
But
okay.
a lot of the monitoring
Yeah.
is in the northern part of the watershed.
Okay. I noticed it mainly covered the north, and I didn't see like Door Creek or. That was my question. Okay. Okay, anybody else? Okay, thank you very much, Marty. That will take us to the CED update.
I don't have anything specific to share. I'll defer it to our follow-up on the wet testing.
So
can I chime in here with something? Michael and I talked about this a little bit ahead of the meeting. I just wanted to mention something for everybody's sake. This week, good news, as far as I'm concerned. I got a new job at the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Thank you. And so I talked to Michael about that ahead of time, just wanted to check and make sure we're all comfortable about any possible sort of conflict or appearance of conflict. I think Michael and Paul will maybe be talking a little bit further about that. I know at the department, probably like a lot of them, governmental sort of, especially regulatory agencies. There's a whole process which I'll be going through on filing my outside employment, is how they call it, for the involvement here at the district. I don't anticipate there being a problem over there as far as my involvement here. I certainly hope not, because I don't want to have to, not keep doing this role on the commission here. But so I'll be going through the process on that side. Again, I think if the way Michael and I talked about it is to just keep our eyes on, as we go forward, if there are issues that come up where we feel like I should recuse myself, or just think about sort of any, again, appearance or concerns about conflicts. I'm not going to be involved in my role in any direct way around permitting or any aspect that, that directly affects the district's sort of business regulatorily with the with the department. But still, I think it's important to be careful and to keep thinking about these things as I embark on this new role. So I just started on Monday, and what I am going to be working on is implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law that passed at the federal level in 2021, and helping do outreach and technical assistance to the municipalities and the utilities like this one and lots of others, sewage utilities, stormwater utilities, and drinking water utilities around the state are all eligible for the loans and some new grant monies that are that come through that federal program into the state. And specifically, my work around all of that will have a bit of a climate resilience focus to it. So it'll be pretty neat work, probably a lot of interesting things that can come back to bear on what we do here at the district too. So that's my new news. Just wanted to share with everybody and let you know we're thinking about conflict and all the other stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ezra. Congratulations. And now we're going to have the full effluent toxicity test.
Have our lab manager, Mary Powers, who will guide the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time today. As Michael said, my name is Mary Powers. I'm the lab manager here at the district. The purpose of my presentation today is to provide a little clarification and to answer questions that came up in the last commission meeting. In particular, I will be focusing on the sampling at the Badger Mill Creek outfall, the testing results from the analysis from our third-party lab, and also the district's requirements following a failed wet test. So these are two pictures of our outfall at Badger Mill Creek. At the last commission meeting, a couple questions were raised about the sampling protocol and what is going into the sample at the outfall. So the picture on the left is meant to show where the outfall is coming out, and I wanted to point you to the sampling location just at the bottom of the water here is where the sample is being collected. And the picture on the right, in the distance, it's hard to get a good picture, but you can see where the outfall connects with Badger Mill Creek. So there is quite a distance between those two locations. Let's see. The permit for the district states that the effluent samples shall be taken using a 24-hour time proportional composite sampler just below the step aerator at the Badger Mill Creek outfall, which is where our sampler is located. Our first retest for the wet test is set up for next week. And so the sampler will be starting collection this Sunday. Next, these are a couple of pictures from the report that we received from our third-party laboratory. So the chart on the left shows replicate results for the chronic wet test on Cereodaphnia dubia, also known as the water flea. And this is a test organism used in the wet test. The chronic test assesses reproduction and developmental success over several days. The graph on the right is a dose-response relationship that is also depicted in our report from our third-party laboratory. You'll notice that the line is fairly consistent until the rightmost points where it sort of drops off. And these 2 points are in the 97% and 100% effluent concentration test groups. You'll see on the chart on the left that I have circled the toxicity unit for chronic result for the test is 1.1. That's circled in red. And in blue, circled is our permit cutoff of 1.03. Okay, so we failed a wet test, now what? So this is just to clarify information from the last commission meeting. So after a failed wet test, we are required to complete 2 repeat tests within 90 days of the original failed test. So our original test date was at the end of July, and our retests are scheduled for this upcoming week, September 3rd, and also the week of September 24th, which is meeting that 90-day requirement. So if one or both of these retests were to come back with failed toxicity levels, the DNR may require further action, and that action would be involving hiring a consultant to perform a toxicity reduction evaluation of the plant. So this would include evaluating plant performance, completing a process review, doing any chemical screening, and also performing a toxicity identification evaluation. And what this is the consultant would take our effluent and treat it to test for different types of toxicity to try and remove it. And they would repeat the wet test to see if they successfully removed toxicity. And if they do, then that would be a clue as to what could have caused our failed test initially. Regardless of what the retests are, we'll come back and report the results of our retests to the commission. So another question that came up is, why did we only fail at Badger Mill Creek? So the crux of the difference between our limits is the in-stream waste concentration, which is included in our permit. So at Badger Mill Creek, our outfall, we contribute 97% of the concentration to that body of water. For Badfish Creek, we contribute 93%. And so this actually translates to a different chronic toxicity cutoff for the 2 locations. So in Badger Mill Creek, our cutoff is 1.03, and at Badfish Creek, it's 1.1. And both wet tests reported this past quarter had a wet test, chronic wet test result of 1.1. And so while we did not fail at Badfish Creek, we also didn't pass with flying colors, I suppose. Thank you for your time. That's all I have. And with that, I will open it up to any questions or clarification you may have.
Beth, you got a question?
Yep, I do. A comment and a question. We're close, really close, and for Badger Mill Creek as well. So it's a good probability that the retest will come back hopefully okay. But if we don't, we're stopping the effluent at Badger Mill Creek at some point anyway. So do we have to go through that whole process if we're shutting off that effluent? That's one thing. And then I'm also would be interested, because we're so close at Badfish Creek, are we always that close at Badfish Creek? Is that a typical result for us?
I guess to answer both of your questions, I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what the implications may be.
So for your first question, so we're required under a permit to do the wet testing, so as long as we have a permit for that outfall, we'll be requiring to do wet tests. We are for permit reissuance in 2025, and we're not probably to discontinue flow until that point or maybe later, so we'll see what that permit says. I anticipate that if we're flowing there, we'll have to do a wet test there until we stop, whenever that is.
Okay, kind of following up on Beth's question, because it's not a high percent of our in gallons per day goes to Badfish Creek, do you think that extra 3.68 million gallons of whatever its toxicity level is, will that be affecting, 3.68 million at Badger Mill Creek, and will that affect the Badfish Creek? So if we're at, and we don't know what historically it is, at least you haven't indicated such. So, but we're at 1.1, could that take it over the 1.1? Or is the concentration, is it such that the amount really doesn't matter?
So it's the same water. The same water goes to both outfalls. The only thing that potentially could change would be the waste allocation load percentage, which I don't think probably will change very much, which could change the thresholds for the wet test. But it's the same water, so there's not like we're adding new water that would cause some new toxicity.
Commissioner Hubble, I just wanted to answer Commissioner Bookland's question. Jenny Faust, one of our chemists, sent me a chat message. And for for Badfish Creek, it's usually 1.0. So to answer what your other question of what Badfish Creek typically is.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, thanks. That will take us to Alan and the operations report.
So Alan, you're going to have to give me a moment. I accidentally closed out of your presentation. So you can riff for a moment.
We can do a quick legal update while you're loading that up.
When you do the legal.
So, basically, I'm providing this month a review of what we did last month in July. And last month in July was yet another very busy month. We had about 51.3 hours of time in, 30. So, a lot of that had to do with various contract issues, ranging from issues associated with how we pre-qualify bidders. There were some issues on confidentiality agreements and contracts that were being submitted to providers. There were some equipment agreements, issues associated with its property, both on-site and a couple of easement issues, language template, but also some easements from specific areas like the. So that was kind of the dominant area. On the regulatory side, there was issues with the agreement on fats, oils, and grease. These two report that Marty has hearing on us. And then there were some interesting employment issues. We had a subpoena. Validate that. And also review of some military pay questions. And July, which is normally a slow month, it was pretty busy. So,
okay, thanks, Paul.
you bet.
Ready? So let me, for the future meeting schedule, look, it's up.
Operations Manager for the district, Alan Grooms, and I'll be presenting the July operational report. And kind of in keeping with some of the themes we have, and Paul just said, it's like usually July is kind of slow. Usually these reports are kind of boring and kind of like a visit to the dentist or the doctor. Boring is kind of how I like them. But unfortunately, this will be covering the month of July. As the commission knows, we had effluent to total suspended solids violations for the month, and I'll get to a full assessment of that as we go. So taking a look at the performance metrics, again, these are usually fairly boring, but there's a couple of things here that are of more interest in July, not interest in a good way. But you'll note the total suspended solids, that gauge, we chose to depict that as pegged. We haven't had to do that yet, but that is a 13.2, which is well above our normal value for total suspended solids. Our limit, for the monthly limit for this period of the year, is 10 milligrams per liter. So we did have exceedance with that, and I'll get into more detail on that. Similarly, in the bottom left corner with the phosphorus, 0.71 was the average for the month. 0.6 is presented here as the average, or the limit. It's actually a 6-month limit, a 6-month average. So that in and of itself is not a violation. I guess if you want to look at it 6 months, we have 3.6 milligrams to distribute. We just used 0.71 for the month of July. I did a quick little bit of math while I was waiting. The rest of the months, if we averaged under about a 0.53 for the other 5 months in that 6-month period, we will meet that criteria and not violate that. So I suppose that is a remote possibility that we could have a future violation on that. But historically, our numbers are well under that, and so far the numbers would support that we're not going to have an issue in that area. The rest of the numbers are pretty. You see the fecal on the disinfections a little bit elevated. That's, again, attributable to the higher total suspended solids in the effluent. So you're just not getting as good a little bit more protective there for the pathogens that would be in that. Still well within our permit limits, but higher than we typically average. Any questions on the July performance metrics? Okay, and I'm going to skim. These are in the packet, and we've kind of gone away from doing a detailed presentation of the resource recovery. But basically, for these parameters, we're right in line with tracking right along with what we would normally have. I would call out, I guess, the struvite production has been higher. We've been working on trying to improve the production on that, the recovery of our effluent phosphorus. So that so far is trending a little bit higher. Although one of the items that we were working on experimentally to try and improve some of that performance may have complicated, not caused, some of our solids issues. So that's a process we're evaluating with our operations. 69.1% Metro capacity used up by the end of July. This morning we're down in the low 60s, I believe. So they're gradually hauling out the end of the summer wheat. Any questions on the resource recovery slides? And I do have a kind of the summation here of what we had for the total suspended solids violations. We did talk about last month in more detail. We thought we would have 4 violations. That is confirmed that we had 4. 3 of those are on Badger Mill Creek, outlined here. That pointer doesn't work, I guess. So we have a weekly limit of 17 milligrams per liter on Badger Mill Creek and 23 milligrams per liter on Badfish Creek. And then our monthly limit is what I actually show you, which is our most restrictive monthly limit, is 10 milligrams per liter. So we had violations on Badger Mill Creek for week 1 and week 2. That 27.6 milligram per liter value for week 2 on for our effluent performance also put us over the Badfish Creek value for week 2. And then we had that monthly exceedance on Badger Mill Creek. So we didn't have anything more than what I presented last month, but certainly this is not something, operationally, certainly it's not something, nothing that's going to go in my highlights in the end of the year reviews. So, but it is what it is. So performance came back about July 15th, and it's been pretty good since then. Some of the things we had for attributions, and I did have a couple pictures here. These were taken on Tuesday, just to kind of, normal what the clarifier surface looks like right now. Pretty clear. That's in the lower left picture. The upper right picture is kind of what I talk about when I talk about popping sludge, which is something that's fairly typical this time of year. It's because of the high amount of nitrogen we're getting in the plant, we aren't set up by permit to denitrify. And so that nitrogen converts to nitrate, and in the final clarifiers in warmer months, it'll take that additional step of denitrification and converting that to nitrogen gas. That's not something that our process is designed for, but what that nitrogen gas does then is it attaches to the settled sludge and wants to pop it to the surface. And that's operationally, we'll talk about these as, these to me look like tennis balls and softballs, and it's kind of just roughly how big is it. You can get larger clumps of this floating, but if you look there, you can see some of them below the surface, slowly working their way to the top. That's fairly typical for this time of year for us to deal with and usually controllable, but that was a large part of what we were seeing in July. We also had, we've been seeing higher nitrogen loads at the plant. Temperatures also were higher than usual for that time of year, especially in the waste treatment, which is obviously the environment the bacteria are working in. And then our lower than normal flows allow more detention time in the treatment process, which also tends to mean less cooling of that liquid, but also more time for those bacteria to do that denitrifying and causing that rising sludge. Those we feel like were the main attributions of what caused the event. We seem like we're operating pretty normally now. Uninvited, I'm going to tie back a little bit to the whole effluent toxicity testing. The first test for Badfish Creek took place while this event was taken at the end of this high solids event. And I think internally when that first report came in that we kind of made it by the skin of our teeth, we were like, well, it's maybe due to the solids. But the performance of the treatment plant was very good at the end of July. So, and the performance there was similar. So I think internally we've kind of ruled that out as the problems there are unlikely to be tied to the solids. It looks like it's something else, and those values are pretty consistent, both in good performance and bad performance. So, unfortunately, you'd like to be able to say, well, the solids caused the issue, and therefore we've solved it, therefore we're good. I wish we could say that. So that's something we're continuing to look for the solution on. So you didn't ask for that, but it's a question that I thought the commission may be interested in perspective on. So any questions for me? That's really all I have.
Yep, I thanks. That's really helpful. So you said it was the temperature and the low flow coming in. We're kind of in a period right now where we've had some really hot weather, and we supposedly are going to get some more hot weather coming up this next week, and we don't have a lot of rain. Are we going to see this happen again? And then I also have a little bit of a concern because we're going to be doing the composite testing again under those same conditions. So are we a little concerned about that? Just one.
It's a good question, Commissioner Bookland, and it's something we've been keeping a pretty close eye on, just the general state of how the plant is operating. Right now, it seems like everything's kind of settled down. Some of what we see, and it's more typical to see that kind of rising sludge in probably late July to mid-August. Usually by this time of year, it's starting to ease up. You're right, the temperatures are climbing in the basin. We do expect, the air temperatures will heat it. So we do anticipate that there's going to be those same kind of conditions present. But one thing, kind of watching the plant for a number of years, and we've got a number of, I think anyway, pretty interesting research studies over the years, just looking at the composition of the, you think about it as, from a distance, it just looks like a big series of tanks. It's a big industrial facility, but it's really a population of microorganisms. And we see those shift season to season. And so some of that, I think, is once they settle out, they seem like they maybe behave a little bit differently. And things have kind of settled in here. It's almost that transition period. I don't quite want to analogize it to a lake turning or things like that, but we do see different populations, not different discrete bacteria, but different proportions of bacteria at different times of the year. So as the system acclimates, and unfortunately, some of what we saw here with the solids going out, we're selecting for different bacteria. That's a selective pressure. So we're adjusting that population to accommodate the conditions. So I'm speculating here. I can't promise, but I feel like we've seen that we've endured that transition, and now we're kind of set up for this low flow, hot weather kind of climate. Plants really it's like any living thing. We don't like a lot of sudden change. We like it to stay pretty steady, and usually that's pretty good performance and behavior. So I hope so too.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
And that will take us to the future meeting schedule. And so the next meeting is the 14th of September. That will be virtual. And then following that, we have two in-person meetings, the 28th of September and the 12th of October. The 28th is the public hearing and then discussion on the 2024 budget. And the 12th is the deliberation and direction on the budget. The 10/26 meeting, October 26th, that will be virtual, will act on the budget. And the idea is that we'll have had most of our discussion, everything decided before we act on the 26th, since we basically have two meetings. So I'd like to try to get everybody here in person for both those meetings. And then that takes us to future agenda topics. Anybody? Other business? Adjournment, Tom?
I move we adjourn.
Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner
Go ahead.
Meyer.
Sure. I second.
I
thought someone
saw
else
his light go on.
chiming in. I didn't want to cut anyone up.
To adjourn, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.